So, tell me the picture. What am I looking at there? Who is that?
Okay, this is me in my last months in the U.S. Army, all plump, ready for plucking or depucking, and no scars, couple of medals, lot of experiences at Camp Carson, Colorado.
You're getting ready to get out of the Army there, right? You're finishing up your tour at Carson?
Yeah, that's not what he said.
Let me take a picture real quick.
You got enough light on it?
And, all right, go ahead and describe that picture to me, Rene. Go ahead.
I'm still here at Camp Carson, having prepped myself for re-entry into the outside world, practicing smoking a businessman's pipe wearing a businessman mustache, looking fit, looking proper. Civilian world, here I come.
I see there's a very large flare on it, so turn it. Yeah, that's good. Very rakish.
I like the pipe.
Okay. All right. What are we seeing? What are we seeing there? What is that?
This little canoe is the USS MacGoffin, the ship that brought a lot of the troops from Korea back to the United States, 1953 in August. The first time we went over on another ship, we went to a typhoon, so it was quite disruptive. But on the MacGoffin, back to the United States, it was smooth sailing.
Okay. Let's see. You're ready for your close-up. You're on the 38th parallel. Tell us about that picture.
Okay, standing 1 foot in North Korea, or so they told me. This is far north as some of us got. Some of us got further in, and some of us got further into their regret because that was Chinese territory. And not long after this, in 1953, a lot of Chinese were in the area commanding it, pushing the U.S. forces and the UN forces further south. But it's a good photograph.
so I can see it. Show me so I can see it. Okay, and okay.
This is somebody at work with a flamethrower. Now, in 1953, I was chosen to go to a school, Camp Casey, in the southern part of Korea. And one of the things that we were trained in was the flamethrower. A lot of people don't like the flamethrower, including a lot of soldiers. But when I went back online and people heard that I was an expert in flamethrower and had my equipment, they were either afraid to have me in their midst, or when they went out on patrol, very happy to have me. And part of it is that if I have a flamethrower, I have a gas connected to my back, a gas cylinder. So one shot, and I go up in an explosion, as does everything around me. But on the other hand, if I'm a flamethrower, then I can sweep an area and scatter or burn any enemy that might be hidden. So it goes both ways. By and large, I didn't mind being the flamethrower, but I got a little bit nervous when you are around people who themselves are nervous.
And at this point, your rifle still isn't clean, right? Okay. And hold that up, Rene, so I can see it. Up a little bit. Hold it up.
Move it up a little. Yeah.
Okay, tell me about that.
Okay. When the good Lord created the earth, He took flat places and He put them someplace else. He did not put them in Korea. There's always one more hill. There's always one more low mountain, another ravine, another valley. You step out and you're either looking up or you're looking down. That was Korea. One can only imagine what a place like that is when the rains come and you find out that, unlike expectations, Korea is not solid rock. It is mud and damp soil. Or you look out and that white stuff coming down from the mountains is snow. And sooner or later, you're going to have to dig your way out of wherever you are and climb one more hill.
This is your famous Tommy gun. The reason you never cleaned your rifle. Tell us about that story.
Well, here I am, posing like a badass paratrooper. We were not issued automatic weapons like this. What happened is that during the Japanese invasion of China, a lot of material was captured by the U.S. forces. One of the many guns that were eagerly picked up by American forces were American-made Tommy guns. They were efficient. As you can see by the stock, by the magazine, they carried a lot of rounds. And easier to carry and use than, say, a M1 rifle, which basically shot off a handful of rounds at a time. And in particular, this one was my special pet, and I kept it as clean as I could. And whenever I went out on patrol, besides anything else I was requested to take, this would be something.
Right. Let me,
Pull it up a little better.
yeah,
Square it up. Okay. A little bit of. Oh wow. Still.
Huh?
Hold still. It's moving. Can you put it down?
I'll get it.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. That's good. Ah.
It's not easy.
Can't to can.
There? It fell over. Here, let's try it here.
Gotta tilt that toward me.
This way?
No, tilt the whole box.
It's not even attached to the bottom. It's just,
This is a picture of somebody at work in one of the dugouts looking for movement across a valley into enemy lines. It could be anything. It could be a convoy. It could be a troop of soldiers. It could be, believe it or not, a beast of burden ferrying hay or supplies, or it could even be some soldiers dragging logs for a place of their own up in the hills. But in any case, the job here is to report on movement, which information is ferried back to headquarters so they can sort it out among other bits of information from other places and make a determination of a big puzzle which might indicate business as usual or a possible retreat from their own Chinese lines or a possible build-up further down the line, or maybe nothing at all. In any case, those holes that we used to maintain and working were big, stinky jobs. You sweat in them. You really can't change much in the way of clothing. You have to tolerate close comfort with other soldiers. Sometimes you have to be wary of gigantic bunker rats who flock to these places because of leftover food. And in any case, it is a job that is required by all enemy forces. And if we didn't have it good, neither did the Chinese.
This is an interview with Rene Cardenas. My name is Salwa Khan, and we're here in Wimberley. Today is August 27th, 2018.
My name is Rene Cardenas. I was born in San Antonio, Texas. My parents were Francisco Cardenas, who was born across the border for one day, and then my mother, who then resided in San Antonio, brought him back so he could have American citizenship. My mother and her antecedents had always been farm workers in South Texas. And she had a very extended family, which I visited when I was a child from time to time. I went to the San Antonio public school system, elementary, PS number 1, called Sam Houston, and junior high school was J.C. Harris, and then went on to high school, Breckenridge High School. The experience of J.C. Harris was a bit different because it was about, I would say, 90% Spanish speaking, although they taught English, of course, and everybody was expected to speak English. When I got to J.C. Harris, the middle school or junior school, it was situated in a more middle-class neighborhood. So consequently, the percentage of Mexican Americans was down, although there's quite a number of them. I did not like education. Like my father, I would rather spend my time reading books, and I found easy access to books via the public library system. But when I went to junior high school, I thought it would be an enlightening educational experience, but to my disappointment, it was a lot of lessons and few books. That is, books that I could read on my own. So that put me on a downspin. And I didn't like the kids, and I didn't like the teachers, and I didn't like having to get on 2 buses to get to school. But in the middle year, that is when I had been there a year and a half, I had what might be called an enlightening episode, in that I found religion. That is, I discovered religion. but I discovered religion as a form of mysticism, not religion as going to church or respecting statues. But the only one that I had immediate access to was the Catholic religion, which had surrounded me all my life. So my discovery that summer was that it was better to stay with the one religion that I was comfortable with and not fight it and leave my mystic fights to myself. And that opened up a door of discovery with the outside world. And I subsequently became the darling of the teachers because I was amenable to all kinds of public performances, and they were always hauling me out of one classroom or another to be in a play or a drama or a sketch or what have you. And ultimately, by the end of the year, when it came time to pick school officers or class officers, I ended up being the second, and a friend of mine, I guess, ended up being the president. As consolation, I was a valedictorian. So that was the end of my 3 years at junior high school. So I thought, this isn't so bad. High school ought to be wonders. It was terrible. I didn't like the students, which were mainly Anglo. I didn't like the teachers, who were very rigid. I learned later it was because they had to hew to lesson plans, and they themselves were evaluated, and so they couldn't very much go outside the line. So much for individuality. I did okay, not that well, and I joined ROTC as an amusement. But I made my mind up that education was not for me. I had to go see the world. I had to experience the world on my terms. As soon as I graduated, I hiked to the Army recruiting offices, but they told me that I was too young. See what had happened, I hated high school so much. I made myself go to summer school, so I advanced 1 year. So instead of graduating at the age of 18, I graduated at the age of 17, which made me too young for the Army. So I whiled my year in junior college, and when that year was over, I enlisted in the Army. I was a volunteer. What they called, my designation was R.A. Airborne, meaning that I was a volunteer into the Army, but I had to go into the Airborne. So I went into the Army. Fort Sam Houston was the processing center. I was given some papers. It's got a few experiences. I remember being in a line where one received shots. Some wise guy went around telling the soldiers that the shots, the one received was with a square needle. And that freaked a lot of people, a lot of soldiers out. I actually remember seeing a big, tall, skinny dude in front of me. He literally turned lime green and passed out. I didn't care. So I went through that part. ended up in Fort Riley, Kansas. And the first thing that the cadre asked us once we were formed was, did anybody have any prior military experience? There were a couple of guys who had been in the reserve or something, and a couple of us had been in ROTC. And so I ended up being a squad leader, which kind of puts you in charge of 7 or 8 guys, just like you, but you're in charge of them. And I did that quite well. And I learned a couple of things about myself. I learned to handle better as I got older. One of them is that I had no fear of being a leader. Other guys might tremble, be nervous about giving an opinion, whether I had no problems with that. Unfortunately, that made me oppressive. I shoved around too much. But the other half was, I was a very understanding leader. Somebody was in trouble, I helped them. And if they weren't helped, then I treated other guy who should have helped them. And that served me well in the rest of the Army, for the most part. So I decided that maybe education hadn't been so bad. So I decided to continue it by taking Army correspondence courses, which you could do. One course was in psychology, and the other was in French. Yeah, French. And one day, a storm descended on that part of the world and flooded the Midwest, including the camp. So for about a week, everybody had to come down from the second story of where they were, because you couldn't live on the first story. And we had to dry everything out, everything in the camp. Clothing, guns, ammunition, whatever. Finally, it was drying out, and we were going back to routine. And I was headed for the correspondence courses office to see about something. And there was a mud puddle in the way, of course. And I jumped it and twisted my ankle and fell. So I ended up in the hospital with my right knee swollen to the size of a grapefruit. So I went to the hospital, and this colonel medical officer came by with a couple of intern lieutenants, and they talked about my case and drew with ink dotted lines around through my swollen kneecap, and this is where they were going to cut. And I said to myself that they weren't going to cut anything. So at night, I forced myself out of bed and forced myself through pain to move my leg. And I did that every night. And every day, it got better and better. At the end of a week, my knee was practically down to normal. And the colonel was puzzled as to why I had done that without any surgery. But in any case, he discharged me. So I went to the office where you sign the papers to be discharged, and the clerk was very happy for me, and he was going to give me a rating of, instead of A1, something like D4, limited duty. No marching, nothing like that. And then I said, "You mean I can't jump out of a plane?" He said, "Soldier, you're in pie heaven for the next 3 years." And I reached through the window and I pulled him by the collar And I said, you put me the way I came in without the damn problem. So I scared him, so he put me down. So the next thing I know, I'm on the train to Fort Benning, parachute training. Yeah. So that was good. My God, I wasn't going to let no damn army clerk have the best of me. I had been planning for this for what, 4 years, you know? Anyway, training wasn't too bad. I made some friends. I was a very rowdy character, as you can imagine.
Where was this training?
What's that?
Where was the training?
Fort Benning, Georgia. I went through it like with everybody else. Met some interesting guys. And then it came time to get your certificate and your assignment. Now, mind you, the war in Korea was being fought. There was another paratrooper regiment out there called the 187, and they were the ones who jumped into combat from time to time. That was what I wanted, okay? So when it came time to graduate me from paratrooper school, I found out that they were sending me to Fort Lee, Virginia. And I asked them what the hell was there. And they told me that that was where they sent soldiers to be riggers. These are the guys that maintain and pack parachutes. Because they don't pack by themselves, you know. And I said, what kind of an assignment is that? He said, you'll be there for 2.5 years. I was going to punch that guy. And I said, no way. So when I went back to the company that they had assigned me, which is a parachute packing and rigging school, I went straight to the commanding officer, the lieutenant, and told him I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be in Korea. So we argued. Anyway, to make a long story short, he transferred me. He assigned me to the cooks of the company to punish me, and maybe I would change my mind. In about a week and a half, 2 weeks, the cooks went up to the lieutenant and said, sir, this is the best damn man you've ever seen us. We'd like to keep him. He said, you're not going to keep him. I'm going to send this guy over to supply. So the same thing there, after about 2 weeks, the supply sergeant went to the lieutenant and said, this guy's marvelous. He can memorize things, he knows where they are. He's got a number system already, everything. I'd like to keep this guy. I said, no, I got to do that. So he called me in, he said, I'm sending you into the infantry, which is what I wanted. So I said, fine. He said if I ever screwed up, he would see me in jail. So I ended up in Charlie Company.
Now, tell me, what year
and
was
the first thing I did...
What year was this?
53. Because I was in the parachute school in December, the year that I went in. And then the next month all this happened. But as soon as I was assigned to the infantry company, I went straight to the sergeant in charge, master sergeant, the guy who really runs the company, and told him, this has been a big mistake. I want to go to Korea. I don't want to be a regular infantryman. You know, they were all parachuters, but... And he says, that there was a waiting list. He said, half of the troopers in this company want to go to Korea. You're at the end of the line, buddy. So I went through that for about 6 months.
Well, why did you want to go to Korea?
Because that's what the action was. They were still fighting. There were still parachute drops. Adventure. And about 5 months went by, and it was terrible. I mean, it was just regular Army training, really. Did about 5 jumps. Big deal. 1 night jump. That was interesting. And finally, I went up to the sergeant, and I made a special deal. I won't say what the deal was, but I made a special deal. And a couple of weeks later, he had me come into his office, and he told me to hold up my right hand. And he said, "Do you swear to faithfully say," some mumbo jumbo he made up on the spot. And then I said, "Yes." "So what does that do?" He says, "You're going to Korea." He'd accepted my deal. So there was, headed for the 187, who was then operating out of Japan, by the way. And now you couldn't find a happier soldier on the planet. This was July, I think, of 52. And we were always getting news about the front, everything else. And one day the news was pretty bad. The Chinese communists had really entered the war in earnest and had made a sort of a giant step into what is now South Korea. So the UN troops was really in dire straits, and of course so was the United States forces, which needed manpower. Well, surprise, surprise, all the infantry people on the ship, on the boat, the ship, headed to Japan, or Korea for that matter, who was infantry, was reassigned to a fighting unit in Korea.
And that included you.
And that was me. So I went from being assigned to a parachute regiment to an infantry division. And we landed and we went through the whole thing, given uniform, rifle, the whole bit. And then...
You were talking about being in Japan with the infantry.
Yeah, Japan was interesting, but I guess I was only there for about 3 days. Like everybody else, it doesn't take long to take an imbecile and turn him into a fighting soldier.
It doesn't.
All you have to do is throw a uniform, a helmet, and give him a rifle. Boom, you've got your fighting soldier. Anyway, but I remember one funny thing is that somebody had picked up a Japanese word, and it was either for toilet or for defecation. And so from the camp we were at, which was a military camp, then there was a whole trainload of soldiers who had been processed and assigned, and the train took you to another place where you were further distributed. And there were scads of soldiers, and of course we were going through fields because railroads don't go through the towns. And you would see scads of soldiers leaning out of the windows every time they saw people working the rice fields and yell at them, "Banjo, banjo, banjo." Nobody knew what that meant. Anyway, my arrival was at what they call a Repel Depot, replacement depot, Repel Depot. And there's hundreds of soldiers there milling around like cattle, all of them waiting for the loudspeaker to say their name so they can report to a tent where they will be further processed and given their ultimate designation. And so we waited and waited. I guess I was there for about 3 or 4 days. Then suddenly my name was called. So I went to the tent, and it was a small tent, very small. But it had a desk and 2 chairs. And this officer, young officer, a lieutenant, Stone Cipher was his name. And he had my record, and he looked it over, and he explained he was with a company called the INR platoon, Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon, which was with headquarters company within the 9th Manchu Regiment of the 2nd Division. Got it? And so he asked me some questions about what was I expecting, which I found astonishing. I mean, I thought I was going to be told what to do, but they were handpicking the best for whatever they wanted. And he explained that in his unit, they were considered the best. As a matter of fact, a company is made up of about 4 or 5 platoons. Infantry's, that's 5 fighting units. In the headquarters company, you got a supply, you got this, you got communications, this, and, headquarters, and the INR. And the INR, he said, is the only fighting unit in the headquarters company of the regiment. And that's what he heads. And I said, what do they do? He says, well, it's mostly recon. We reconnoiter the back roads and pick up stragglers that are defectors from the other side who are wandering around, so forth and so on. And occasional duties as required. And I was frank with the guy. I says, it doesn't sound exciting. I don't think this is the kind of thing that I'm looking for. And he said, what are you looking for? I said, sir, I've been trying to get to this fight for about 5 years. I like to see some action. The more action, the better. He said, well, I didn't tell you the bad part, but the bad part is the battle. And we get more than we want. I said, sign me up. And that's how I ended up with the Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon. Now, the United Nations had units in Korea. And other countries had their regiments, which were assigned to American regiments. And the ones that were assigned to us were the Thais, the French, and the Dutch. And don't remember too much except one time. I have to tell you that by the time I got there, there was a truce between Korea and the UN, so there weren't any pitched battles. Everybody was more or less stuck where they were and sniping and patrols, little forays like that, waiting for the big guys to decide whether to continue the war or not. But in any case, you stay in fighting trim, so you still have to go through the motions. And I remember one time we had assigned to us a lieutenant, fresh from the country, from the U.S., dumbest guy you ever saw. And from day one, nobody liked that guy. He had a very naive appreciation of what a lieutenant of a fighting unit would be. Instead of learning from the seasoned troopers, he thought he knew it all because he had gone to officer school, you see. Anyway, nobody liked the guy. But one time, or one night rather, this must have been the first week he was there, I was with some other guys on some foxholes at the top of a ridge, and the ridge overlooked the valley, and the other side of the valley had some where the Chinese were, and the lines didn't move. But now and then there would be patrols at night. Anyway, the lieutenant came up, and he was asking questions. And he was standing next to me, and a soldier to his left lit up a cigarette, and the lieutenant chewed him out. You know, the soldier put the butt out, don't you know that the light can be seen for miles, and they'll know where we are, etc. And as he was chewing the guy out, to his horror and our amusement, about a half mile down the ridge on our side, there was a rolling ball of fire rolling down the hillside. And he said, "What the hell is that?" he said. And somebody told him, "Sir, those are the Thais. They haven't seen action in a couple of nights, so they do this to dare the Chinese to attack them." So that's why we didn't like the lieutenant. You're so dumb. There was a big heavy fight. So a contest between the captain who commanded the company, who's a short guy, and me. For some reason, although I can guess, he didn't like me. Now, even though there's limited resources on the front lines, because you're on the front lines, the Army does have a system called company punishment. And company punishment is punishment doled out to a soldier for some kind of a minor infraction. It's not like a major crime. So the punishment can be anything from picking up debris along a highway, or cleaning all the cars, so and so on. But this guy didn't like me. And I swear to God, as soon as I got out of one company punishment, I got into another one. And I would see it coming. So I realized that the only way for me to escape this guy was to volunteer for the patrols of the other units. So when the call came, we need a volunteer for Dutch patrol. They're going up into sector S5. We need a one for the Thai, whatever. One time it was interesting related to that the French had been one place and then had moved over closer to us. So somebody, some officer, somebody had decided to make friends with them or whatever. And so I went along for no other reason to escape company punishment. But while I was there, two things. One of them was that they drank wine. These guys drank wine. I mean, that was their drink. That's not water, wine. It's astonishing to us because, as I said, the I&R company was one of units within headquarters company. Headquarters also had the Red Cross, one guy, and the regimental religious officer who served everybody. And this guy was another idiot. He was of a very heavy Bible-thumping Christian denomination. So no swearing. You better go to field church on Sunday, and no drinking. So our beer ration was cut off. Couldn't have any beer. So there I am in the French camp, and they drink wine. And I thought, maybe I can transfer to them. Of course you can. But the second thing I discovered was there was a French soldier, and his name was something like Garcia or Rodriguez. And I said that was kind of odd for a French soldier. And I spoke to him in English. He responded and said that Cardenas was an odd name for an American soldier. So before we knew it, we were talking in Spanish because he was a Basque. Okay? And of course, you know, they're bordering Spain, and so we just chatted like crazy until the guys who were in the assignment had to come and get me 3 times, you know. So I went back with the guys laden with bottles of wine and a new friend. Anyway, winter started coming and it got tough. Some snow, fairly light, but no real storms. But it started to get cold. And water was precious because it was all frozen, no matter what. So shaving was a problem. Keeping yourself clean was a problem. And I remember at that point, my morale was really low. I mean, it was so bad. It seemed like the whole world was against me, including myself. And one day we were marching down this muddy trail on the way to someplace. And there was a bunch of French soldiers coming back this way. And they looked terrible. And I decided to make my dream come true. So I switched and joined the French column going the opposite direction. And I thought I could get away with it. My brain was so frozen I couldn't think straight. But somebody yelled, "Sergeant, Cardo is joining the French." So somebody went and grabbed me, put me back. So there I go on company punishment, naturally. Anyway, when it came time to leave the company, I have a lot of incidents. Time to leave the company, I had to turn in all my weapons. There had been a big scandal concerning the captain, which I will not go into detail. but he was repositioned, not demoted, but changed over to something else. Actually, he was put in charge of supply or supervising supply. And while they went over, while they audited his records, and here I was, I've turned down all my weapons, including some that I had not been issued. Well, Chinese guns and things like that. Like Tommy gun, wasn't issued that. Anyway, the captain came by as I turned in my rifle, and he grabbed my rifle, and he looked down the barrel, and he said that it was so dirty, he couldn't see. Well, of course you couldn't see it. I never used it, so I never cleaned it. Why would I clean the damn rifle when I got a Tommy gun? You're stupid. I didn't say that. Anyway, he took off but addressed the sergeant in charge, and he said that this man cannot leave Korea until that rifle is spotless. It would have taken me 3 days to clean that damn thing. So I didn't know what to do, so I moped around for a few minutes, and the supply sergeant, I can't remember his name, I guess he was one of the other guys that had a grudge against the captain. A lot of people did. So he said, I'll fix this. So he had a chogi, which is a Korean worker, doing everything behind him. He told the chogi to give him a clean rifle. So the chogi gave him a clean rifle. The supply sergeant looked up that number, assigned that rifle to me, and took my dirty rifle and put it in the other pile. And just as the truck came to pick me up, the sergeant looked at me and said, take off. So we're running after the truck. That's how I left Korea. Anyway.
What kind of action?
Those are some of the funny things, but it was really a very, very dangerous place. It was like World War I. It was almost like trench warfare. In certain places, if you showed your head above the trench line, you could get it blown off. And then, of course, there was a lot of all manner of artillery. The worst being that you never knew when it was going to happen. I mean, it could be at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. One of the jobs that I had in the INR platoon was observation. So we would have, the Army had these outposts. So you have a ridge line, but on the ridge line you have what they call a finger. All mountain systems have the same thing. It's like a big, huge flange. And at the end of that would be an outpost. People, the armies would dig out and put logs and a roof on it so they could observe the enemy. But that point would be anywhere from 50 feet to 1.5 miles from your own people, depending on the terrain, you know. And you always have to have somebody on guard because you never knew, you know, when they might attack sneaking up on you. And sometimes they attack by mortar. And every now and then, although a direct hit really didn't hurt us that much, except make us, you know, all the dust on you. but it might hit the line in back of you. So it would be clogged. So you'd have to, undig yourself so you could have easy access to the back. And the pen, I'm sorry, but most of the anecdotes I have are funny, even though they were in a bad situation. One of the times that I was put on company punishment, the first sergeant, Sergeant Gash, who I saw in a Hollywood movie later, saw me digging trenches or something. And he says, why don't I get off this damn ritual of company punishment? I said, I don't know. I told him, I don't know what to do, Sarge. Every time I'm not on company punishment, the captain sees me and finds fault in something. And there I go again. And he said, well, why don't you get out of sight? Go to one of the outposts. I hadn't thought about that. I mean, I went on a patrol, but that was only for about 4 hours at night. So I did that. I volunteered and got one of the outposts. And it was a dug-in. It had two sides were portholes, so to speak, where you could see out. And then a trench in the back, connecting you to, connecting us to a small platform of rock where jeeps or vehicles could come in. Not much, but that's how we got there. And the thing is that I went up there and took a pin-up picture of a girl in a bathing suit from, I think it was Esquire magazine. I had seen the magazine, really liked the girl, Peggy Carr. And I wrote her via the magazine, asking for a photograph. I said, and I got it. Everybody was so envious. Anyway, when I went up to the outpost, naturally I carried it with me, and I pinned it to the side of the wall. And one day, the captain, the good captain, came to visit. Because you see, if you're not in combat line, you don't get points. And an accumulation of points allows you to go home. And I think it was 24 points. So if you're in headquarters, you're not in combat. And he was the commander, so he's not in combat. So he thought he'd get some points. So he came to see us. Incidentally, when I was on company punishment, I was still getting my points. Crazy army. Anyway, he came up there and looked around. Oh, he arrived with the regimental minister. So they asked questions, and the minister looked at Miss Carr and said that this was blasphemy. This was not unto the vision of the Lord or whatever. And the captain wanted to find out who put this picture up here. So I raised my hand, and he said, you're on company punishment. Report to me when this is over, like in 2 days or something. So he went. Surprise, surprise, the next day, the regimental commander had showed up with the captain. the captain had bragged about his getting his combat point by visiting us. And the regimental commander had never done that. So he lightly berated the captain. He said, well, now you have to take me up there. So the two came up there, and they looked around, and the regimental commander was a good guy. So he did his, yes, very good, this is very nice, good work, that kind of thing. So we were all grinning, and then they decided to take the jump. And I said, sir, is it okay for me to have a picture like this? And he looked at us, oh yeah, you gotta keep your morale up. I mean, you could lose your head tomorrow. No, this is perfectly all right. And then one of my buddies said, do you suppose we could have something else besides some kind of bean, lima beans or something? They gave us a big gallon can to supplement our little cans. And he was surprised. He said, you guys are eating out of cans? He said, yeah, that's all we have. He turned to the captain. He turned to the captain and said, I want these guys to have hot chow every day. And so, every day, a truck would come up with a big gallons of hot food and park in the little platform and toot the horn. See, they were out of range. Toot the horn, and we'd go down there. That's one of the reasons he didn't like me. Little lick. Anyway.
So were there any experiences that were
I'm
frightening?
sorry?
Were there any experiences you had that were frightening, scary, or nothing
I'm
like
sorry.
that? Was there any time when you were frightened or scared or, because of what was going on?
No, I'm not that kind of person. I get like other people when they get scared, they stay scared for about 5 minutes, and I shake and then it goes away. Like when I was in the paratroopers, the first couple of seconds, you think you're going to die, but you don't. But in Korea, there was I had a lot of escapes, a lot of near hits, as you say. One time, I was guarding a bridge at night, and a convoy, army convoy, was passing behind me. But like all convoys, there would be stretches when somebody was slow, so there was a gap. And it was at such a time that somebody in the grasses, in the dark, took a pot shot at me. And that scared me. I don't know where it came from. And I got the word out, and the next thing you know, we got a bunch of people out there looking. They never did find whoever it was. But who knows? Then one time when we were at one of these outposts, I mean, it took a long time to get there. So you can imagine that it was fairly comfortable because you couldn't be running in and out for supplies every day. And it was really more like a giant lean-to on the side of a cliff. That's what it was. And we had a stove, a metal stove, and a stovepipe. And one time, something was going wrong. We weren't getting the right distribution between air and fire going up. So I told the guys I'd go up there and see if I could fix it. And the top of the place was about between here and the wall, square. That's the pipe right here. So I scrambled up there and looking at the stack. And the next thing I know, pew! A bullet bounced off the cliff all about that far from my head. It's what they call a 50 caliber rifle, but some Chinese sniper on the other side took me in. I scrambled back down and I told the guy somebody else had to go up there. Wasn't gonna leave me. And see, another time I was with Sergeant Stanley Johnson, and our duty was to go around inspecting the fortifications of various outposts connected by, not at the end of a trench, connected by a trench. And just as we got to one place, which was empty, by the way, nobody there, the Chinese started with the mortar barrage. So we were kind of stuck there for a couple of minutes. And then when I thought it was over, and I was also getting nervous about being someplace where the mortar rounds were falling fairly close, I prodded Stanley Johnson, the sergeant, towards the entrance and told him we ought to get out of here. And at that second, he turned and pushed me back into the middle of the room just as the mortar round went off almost at the entrance. Bad. As I've mentioned before, my stay in Korea was the last year of the Korea War, which is when a lot of discussions were going on between the two sides. So at the local level, that is, at the troop level, nobody wanted to be foolish enough to initiate a wide operation when the very next day peace would be called. And so their soldiers would have been dead, would have been killed for nothing. The other thing is that as the war went on into its last year, positions became more and more solidified, and where somebody might find refuge in a foxhole, now they actually had big bunkers with several rooms because they had been built up over the years. So the big fighting that was going on, and we had them. Unfortunately, we didn't have them where I was involved. But, for example, when I was recruited into the INR platoon, I was recruited because the Central Front was getting hammered. So there was a lot of fighting going on. Some of the guys in my platoon were holdovers from such battles. They never really talked about it. Guess when you experience something like that, you would just as soon not relive it. But I was looking at some of the photographs that I took when I was in Korea. Must be about 50 of them. But they don't show me in action. And the reason is because I was the one taking the pictures. Okay. So
Did you want to look at some of the pictures?
anyway, let's see what else.
So you were going to talk about the Bronze Star. What happened when you, after that, you got the Bronze Star? Talk about that experience.
Oh, we had a company, not my company, another company, what they call a line company, had asked for a representative from the I&R platoon to be on their patrol because they thought they were going pretty deep behind Chinese lines, or at least in a gap between the lines, and see if they could bring back a live prisoner, and see what else. And so I went along with them. They were very glad to have me along, simply because I was an extra guy, I guess. So we clambered out of the holding area down into this deep trench, which seemed like it went on for miles. It was getting dark, and paused I don't know how many times, each time listening for something, and then got into open ground, and that I remember the device was to scatter out in a kind of a rough line formation towards the Chinese until we found either a small unit of soldiers, if we were lucky, maybe one or two, and I was on one flank. I was either the left or the right. So in other words, there was somebody to my left or somebody to my right. And somebody made some kind of noise, kicked a rock or something. And then we heard Chinese noises. And then the next thing you know, somebody lit a light. I don't know if it was us or them. And then the firing started. When firing starts at night, you don't know what the hell's going on. So naturally, we're firing back. And The thing is that on a night patrol, the way I got it was that once firing broke out, you pull back. Because the objective is not to engage the enemy, although some do. The idea was to capture the enemy. And if that fails, then your mission has failed. So you pull back. But we had spread out ourselves to a point that we couldn't easily pull back for fear of being discovered or leaving somebody behind. And if you're going to leave somebody behind, might as well surrender. But we got together, I guess, in a rough unit and fired to where we thought the Chinese were. And then there was somebody called out that the squad leader, whoever was in charge, was left behind or couldn't be located. So they were all telling me. Why, they told me I'm not in charge. But anyway, I said, I'll go look. And sure enough, after about a quarter of a mile, I discovered the guy who led the patrol and two other guys crouched behind some stumps and firing at a group of Chinese that were trying to advance on them. And from where I was, at a higher level, I saw that if they kept this up, more Chinese would come, and that would be the end of the Americans, those three guys. So I didn't see I had any choice. So I scrambled down the hill, yelling like a mad Mexican, firing into the, I don't know what it was, about 6 or 7 Chinese soldiers, and telling the Americans to get the hell out of there. And then a week later, I was given the Brown Star. It was the stupidest thing I've ever done. In one of these trench episodes, there were 3 of us, and a bombardment had started. And when something like that starts, you just don't know what the heck's going on. You feel like every second the walls will cave in, the roof will come down, or you will just disappear into fragments. In any case, wherever you're at is just dust. Just dust. You can hardly see. And your hearing starts to fail because all you hear is this big drumming, thrumming sound, one right after the other. And at one point, I had looked around and remembered, or thought I remembered, those other 2 guys saying that they were getting out, but I wasn't sure, and I certainly couldn't see that well. But I decided to go for broke. So, grabbed my rifle, which was somewhere on the floor, and ran for the door. and knocked myself out on the, what do you call it?
Oh, the top of the door?
The rafter.
You know. So when they came and got me, they thought it was shrapnel. And I was too woozy to explain what the hell had happened. And I was also embarrassed for my two buddies who left me behind. Anyway, that's the story.
Okay, so where were you when the war ended? Where were you when the war ended? And what happened after that? How did you come home, or what happened?
When the war ended, I was on outpost duty in the middle of Korea, and then we got the word. And you you could hear it left and right, all the guys cheering for miles and miles. And then about 1 or 2 months later, I was on a ship back to the States. And first I went to, I think it was Fort Ord, California, another Repel Depot. And here we go again. And I told that guy, look, I've had a long, sad history with you guys. And I should be in the paratroops. Now I'm back, and you can just put me back in the paratroops. And the guy said, look, soldier, you only got about 7 months to go. The Army's not going to waste that. You go where we send you. So they sent me to Camp Atterbury. No sooner was I there than they told me, they're closing this camp down. We're sending everybody to Camp Carson, Colorado, which is where I was discharged from.
So what was that like? Was it a good experience getting out? Were you glad to be getting out?
Was that what?
Were you glad to be getting out of the Army at that point? Or what did you feel?
Well, Camp Atterbury had its attraction. For one thing, one of my best buddies, Tom Sciolas, was working at night and going to college. He was originally from Colorado, but he had ended up, I think, getting some kind of a very minor scholarship in Indiana, but in Indianapolis. But Indianapolis was only a short trip north of Camp Atterbury. So one of the nice things is that I could drive up there and talk to, see the guy. He'd gotten married since, so that was interesting. And then the other thing is that one of my buddies in the company was a fellow, big, tall fellow, named Socrates M. Fotides. And he's a kind of a funny guy, but couldn't make fun of him. But he didn't wear the paratrooper sign. He wore the glider. He had been in the gliders before they became the paratroops. So that was kind of interesting. Anyway, it was his car, so he was happy to take me up and down. And then we started the packing and the packaging and the wrapping. So then we ended up in Camp Carson, Colorado. See what happened again? Oh, Camp Carson, Colorado. I was assigned to a company, infantry company. I can't remember the name of it or the name of the regiment, but I was still a private. I was still a private. Small wonder, huh? And one day, we were out in maneuvers, meaning you're out in the wilds. It was winter, and all the soldiers had to take their mess kit, aluminum plate, and go through the chow line, which was in heat underneath the tent, nicely heated, obviously. Get your food. It was breakfast time. And then go outside and find a rock or something to sit on and have your breakfast. And I will not lie when I said that by the time I sat down, my eggs were frozen. Anyway, at that point, Patrick, Corporal Patrick, who was a good friend, he became a good friend in that company. Told me that Captain such and such wanted to talk to me. And I thought, oh God, here we go again. Company punishment. And I was introduced to the captain, a nice fellow. He said that he was with the headquarters company of the regiment, and among its components was an S4. Or was it S2? S2 or S4. One of them designated as operations. Can't remember. And that vacancy was open. And according to my background, I would be a perfect fit. And I told him I didn't want to do it. He said, why not? I said, you're a private, and give us a couple of months and we'll make you a sergeant. Mind you, only had about 5 months to go in the Army. He said, why not? He said, why not? I said, because I don't like working with officers. Pow, 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 pow. Well, a few minutes later, the call went out that it was too cold for anything else, so we should all get on the trucks and head back to camp. So there we were. And in the middle of that, I gave myself a stern talking. I said, what is wrong with you? No, really. I mean, why? Why do that? And we got back to camp and defroze ourselves. And then I went and checked with Patrick, who being a corporal had his own little cubicle. And he was almost fast asleep. And I told him that I wanted him to go to that captain and tell him that he, Patrick, had changed my mind. And Patrick said, no way, you told him no. You insulted him. I said, Patrick, I will kill you if you don't do it. So the next thing you know, I went out there and I became operations sergeant. Best damn operations sergeant in that division. Really, I was the best. And then I became corporal, and then became sergeant, you know. How insane is that story?
So, do you think that your military experiences affected your life after? In what way?
I don't know. I suppose it has in ways that I couldn't measure, that I couldn't discuss, you know, verbally. I mean, they're just it's like small things like normally when I put my footwear away, I tend to put them side by side. I was thinking the other day, nobody taught me that. That's what they used to do in the Army. You know, everybody else would just, you know, throw them away. So you never know. It's almost like for anybody to answer a question like that, in all truthfulness, they should have like a God looking at them from a distance and observing a person's life and saying, "Oh, you see that little thing? He got that in the Army. Oh, look at the way he talks. Got that in the Army." But you can't do it internally, you know.
Did you find it difficult to adjust to civilian life out of the Army?
What?
Did you find it difficult to adjust to civilian life when you got out of the Army?
Yep. With my family. I was the oldest of 7, and we lived in a 4-room house. My father had his own shop. That was one of the things I wanted to get away from, and there is no environment, you know. But the other thing is that it is very common, speaking generally, for a lot of people, a lot of individuals, to wonder if, of all the siblings, they were the ones adopted. I've encountered that several times. You know, it's not a mania. It's just sort of a thought that occurs to them. And that never occurred to me. But I could see what it would. Because my dad got a business degree, a 2-year business degree in San Antonio. And he was a grocer. He was a lot of things, but he was a grocer that I remember, not too far from the wholesale produce people, pecan shelling company, where he met my mother. And then that closed, and then he resolved never to work for anybody again. He's going to be his own boss. So he found the books or borrowed the books or whatever on horology,
The F?
clocks,
Oh,
and really studied them and what it takes to do repairs, etc. And so he always owned the property, which was in downtown San Antonio. So every time he changed businesses, they were right there. So that's what he did. So he set up this. He operated that until he died. But that was, to me, most impressive, that a negative one and a positive one. The positive one is that when he was young and recently married, had ambition. And by ambition, is that the next step or something more than what he had right there. The negative one is that he was consumed by the clutches of culture. It would never have occurred to him not to have a family. So he had one family with 3 kids, got divorced, and then 7 kids with my family. Now, if you're ambitious, you don't want to have that many dependents. So that's what I mean about the negative side. And I saw that, and I thought it was very similar to most people, in my set. So that was one of the pushing influences when I was in high school. Get the heck out of here. I didn't know what the army would be like, but I certainly knew what would happen to me had I stayed in San Antonio.
Were any of your siblings?
What's that?
Any of your siblings go in the military?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Did any of your siblings go in the military?
Oh, no. Have you met my daughter?
Wait a minute. No. Met your granddaughter.
Only one brother went into the Navy. That I could tell it didn't do him a bit of good. The Navy, what do you expect?
Okay, here's a good question. How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
Well, I mean, I can make facile statements such as all wars are initiated by ego, for whatever that means. But war is sort of almost like another facet of religion, is that the more you look at it, the more it's hard to understand why it exists. mean, military service is something else. I mean, what was that question?
How has your military service impacted your feeling about war and the military in general?
Oh. I have always had an opinion about military service, always. And that is that in this country, everybody should have some kind of service, not necessarily military, but some form of it, you know. I don't know why they don't do it. I guess Americans think that if you would do anything in step or you wake up at the same time, it's like the Army. Who knows? I know a lot of guys that, I've met a lot of people that I know would benefit from a couple of years in the Army. As a matter of fact, when I was up at Columbia taking my master's, I was taking an economics class from Eli Ginsberg, one of the top economists of his time. And on a particular lesson, he had a whole auditorium full of people. He was talking about how the military is a force in the economy, how it takes people out of the workforce, you know, and puts them someplace else. Otherwise, they're looking for jobs. And there were some other things involved. There were a couple of guys there to my left, I remember that. They spoke up and they said that they didn't think that the military was worth a damn. One said that they had been drafted for 2 years in the Army, and all they thought it was a waste of time. Because all they did was march, all they did. And I couldn't hold myself. And I stood up and said that was because they were brought up in a very nice neighborhood with nothing to worry about. But there were a lot of people like me who didn't have those things handed to them and didn't have those things that made them better people. And that's what the Army did. And it made you, it gave you character. And I said, if you have bad character, Army's not going to change that.
So then you do feel that the military benefited you in some way, right?
I'm sorry?
You feel that your military service was a benefit to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. In what ways?
It's hard to say.
This is a good one. What message would you like to leave for future generations who might hear your interview?
Future generations what?
Who will hear your interview? who will hear your interview.
Not to vote for people like Trump? No.
It's a good one.
Or think before you vote?